I'm deeply honored to invite Mr. Som Mittal. Mr. Mittal is the former chairman and president of NASSCOM, which is the premier trade body for the IT BPM industry in India. He held the position of president NASSCOM from 2008 onwards till most recently. Under his leadership, the industry crossed the USD $100 billion milestone. Mr. Mittal has also held corporate leadership roles in the IT industry, including companies such as Wipro, Digital, Compaq, and HP. He also works in various influential positions with the Indian government. He's a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Committee on National E-Governance. He's a board member of the Institutes of Technology and the Global Advisory Council of the WIHCA, and a board member of many leading corporate organizations. For his contribution to industry in India and globally as well to society, he has received recognitions including the Distinguished Alumni of IIT-K and Lifetime Achievements Awards by the World Information Technology and Services Alliance for his leadership in the global ICT industry. I'm pleased to invite Mr. Mittal for the keynote address. Mr. Mittal.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good morning, and apologies for that long introduction of mine. But very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to come to Singapore and also be with many of you here who are very deeply interested in this topic. I presume that somebody like me coming in here, coming and speaking from India, in particularly the word D makes much more sense because we believe that we can and are transforming lives with technology. Now, I think it should be clear that as we speak here in Singapore, and over this last 20 years or plus that I've been coming to Singapore, even more, we've seen how Singapore has transformed. But I think we're not talking about that kind of transformation. We are really talking about people who don't have absolute basic necessities in life. And the only option that we see is technology. This presentation that I have, I put together because there's a lot of research that's going on. So many of my slides here are actually borrowed from McKinsey Global Institute, who have recently done work. And I would urge that I think their work is available on the websites. So one was about 200 technologies that they looked across the world. They selected 12 that were relevant for the future, as they call them destructive technologies. But then, we worked together with them and identified a different set of 12, which we thought were quite relevant to India. And with that, we said, what can we really do to transform? What I would cover here is actually really talk about the issues and challenges that we face when we look at countries like India, and I do see many people here today from the developing world as well. So probably they face the similar issues. What technology can do to transform recent success stories that have, and I think this is important because in most cases, there's a lot of hype around technology and what it can do. There are lots of great pilots that are around, but really we have to move beyond the pilots. Can it scale? Can it really go to millions of people? Not that those pilots weren't relevant, that they didn't impact people, but really it was about how successfully we can scale it. And of course, the hurdles continue. So as I do this and your 4-day conference takes off, I do hope that you're able to synthesize this, come back to countries like India and many others, and share your cumulative research learnings that we could take together. Now, how many of you here have been to India? Well, a few hands went up. As much as I try and put it up in pictures, I don't think you'll get it, right? So I do invite all of you to visit India sometimes. So on one hand, you have complete chaos. There's a train, people all over it, and so on. And on the other hand, there is this whole contemporary things of what's going on. 7th largest country, 2nd largest population, very young population. We have more than 65% of our people below 35. Very high tele density. Can you believe till 1995, you did not have access to a landline. It took you 3 to 4 years of applying for a telephone and getting a telephone. And I'm not talking about centuries back and decades back. It's just 20 years back in 95 when the mobile phone came. And today we have a coverage where today we have over 900 million subscribers, which is almost 75% plus tele-density. And just this one technological change has changed the way people are living today. Because it's not only about voice, people are using it for business, their livelihood depends on it, and more changes. And as we get to smartphone, as I'll share, we are probably seeing more happening. But as we speak there, poverty rates continue to be high, though from a level of 45%, it has come down to 22%. But when you put 22% on a 1.2 billion people, that's a lot of people who are still in poverty. This is a very busy slide, and I would again recommend that those of you who can access it, I tried to get from FT this much better high-resolution slide, but they couldn't give it to me. This is a projection they've done for 2035, and you see lots of colors there, and these are colors where there is a big shift happening in the demographics. And if you would look at this bubble here, this represents Asia, and this is really talking about how the growth will happen from now till 2035 in terms of middle-class population. So that's a huge growth of middle-class population. And what you see here in the squares here, which you can't read from that far, right, is $1 trillion of additional spend. So just to compare, US is 4.5, China is about 10, 11, and India is at $14 trillion. So there is a big shift that's happening. Now, all this is very good by an economist and cephalologists and demographics project this, but the question is, what does this mean, right? What's ahead? So it's not only what is today in terms of the demographic profile, but what's ahead that we need to worry about. So all this means there's a big opportunity, and this is about healthcare spending. We expect $160 billion more to be there by 2017. 25% of all the world's skilled workforce is going to be coming in. And I can go on with this, but the issue is we have, by 2025, 600 million people in the middle class, and they would need water, sanitation, healthcare, and everything else that we speak about. So the scale is very different, right? It's really large. And the moment you talk about scale, that's the place where I think technology really starts coming in, because the only way we can reach out to these large and make this happen is only technology. So while we're talking about this huge opportunity, let's look at the gaps that exist even today. Today in India, we have 1/3 to half the number of doctors per capita compared to China and Brazil. There is 43% absentees in the healthcare workers, because when they get to the villages, they don't have facilities, and hence, they're not there. 120 million rural households do not have a bank account. We have a very large share of energy that we import. 88% of the Class 8 students, though they have passed out Class 8, are not able to read what Class 1 text should be read. So you go to the school, you finish whatever you do, but they're not really learning in a lot of ways. 48% of the agricultural yield of Asian countries. So on one hand, I talked about all the opportunities that you saw there. On the other hand, just look at this, where we have gaps in every single area. 105 liters of water per capita when we need 140, and traffic congestions and so on. And more importantly, I think if you look at what's here, 50% of the government spend does not really get translated for the purpose it was meant. That means government actually is providing a lot of social security and funds for that, but there are leakages that happen, and at the end of it, you don't really land up getting the benefit. So having talked about the size and the opportunities, here are our present situation. So the scope of improvement of millions of lives is huge. And I think it's important that we get an idea of the scale. So these numbers, again, this is a slide that MGI had done. In case of healthcare, with technology, we could impact 400 million who could access quality healthcare. This is more than the population of the United States, right? So I think we're really talking about very large scale. When you talk about skills, it's twice the number of people that we're talking about getting scaled today. Bank accounts, twice the number again. 50% increase in farm productivity. 10 to 15% reduction in travel time. So, you know, the scales and the job ahead is very large. Again, I'm repeating here that it is important to see this because we have to really bring down technology to a level where simple people who even may not be educated are able to access and use it. And I'll give you some examples of how that's already started happening. So, you know, it is important that we look at this not only in terms of impacting people, but the economic benefit that comes in. Because when you look at the economic benefit, then government starts allocating funds for this. So we do believe that 20 to 25, 30% of India's incremental GDP would be attributed to technology making that impact here. We think that the spend itself will be 4 to 8 times. And in fact, just because of this reason today, companies like Intel and Microsoft and Google are actually spending fair amount of money today in ensuring that technology there is available and accessible to a large number of people. So there is an economic reason to do this and not only a social one. So last year, when our new government came in, they have launched and actually bracketed many things that were happening earlier under what is known as the Digital India program. This has 3 pillars, which is digital infrastructure, governance and services, and empowerment of citizens. And that means we have high-speed internet availability. Every individual has a digital identity, digital bank accounts, common service centers in the villages, safe and secure cyberspace. So these are the specific areas that work is going on. Online and mobile government services and so on, as you can see here. But there is a very important one here, which is about universal digital literacy. Because you can keep talking about technology, but then if you didn't have people digitally literate, how would you access that? Sorry. So let's look at what possibly and which areas can technology impact. Financial services, $150 billion of government payments can be done electronically with 5 to 20% savings in leakages. When I say leakages, from the time money leaves and the actual outcome, huge amount of translation losses happen. Either the money is stolen or wasted and it doesn't reach there. But if it reached directly to people, which by the way has started this year, I think we can have a major impact. 300 million people can be financially included. That would mean that they could actually get loans not from money lenders who give them at 4% per month interest, but much more affordable. In fact, all experiments and research has proven that the non-performing assets are very low when it is microfinance as compared to large loans that corporates take. So these people do pay back, but the interest rates are very high. But if they really got into the banking system, then they get away from the clutches of the money lender. And so financial services very clearly as one area. Education and skills already happening, but at a scale that's very different. And mind you, when we look at countries like India, and I probably didn't read that data out from there, if I take out my own currency note of India today, you have close to, sorry, I left that in my hotel room. We have 14 languages printed. So when it says 100 rupees or 10 rupees, you have to print in different languages on the currency note. We have very large number of languages, dialects, cultural issues. So when you talk about education, every time that you go to a new place, it changes. So we need 24 million more graduates that will go through this adaptive learning. Every year, we are adding very large number of engineering graduates. So education and skill will be one big area where the impact could be felt and is required. Healthcare, in the, when you look, so India today has a very large amount of what's known as medical tourism, which means that people from other countries are coming to get healthcare in the country because the tertiary healthcare is really at international standards. But the moment you get to secondary and primary healthcare and you get down to a village level, you have big issues. And Professor Arul was telling me about the work that he has been doing, where you've seen that at grassroots levels and villages, there is, it's not even, healthcare is not even accessible in any manner. There was a time where we sent healthcare workers to those villages, but by the way, if you don't have facilities, etc., there's very precious little that somebody could do. So in most of these cases, again, there have been scalable projects that have been done, which I would share some examples about. So clearly, financial services, education, healthcare, agriculture, and food. In most cases, the farmers don't even get information of new pests that are coming in, what kind of crops that they could do multiply with, weather conditions, and hence there is no real-time information that they get, and a major impact on food, because we need to improve the farm productivity to be able to feed a large number of people there. In fact, I'm not sure how many of you know that a very large amount of what we produce also does not ever reach the plate because the whole supply chain itself is so poorly managed, and hence another opportunity. Energy, while we talk about all the non-renewable energy as well, but we have very large losses in transmission because we don't have smart grids and they are not managed. And of course, the infrastructure. So broadly, there is no area that I can think of today where technology cannot make a significant impact, and this is not by small percentage points, but dramatically changing this. So nice, so we have found that we have a need and there is technology, and the technology is constantly evolving, and surely there are areas that it can be. Well, where are we right now on these areas? So let's look at the current drivers, right? So why now? Why not over the years? And I would think that one biggest thing that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years is that technology for the first time has got consumerized. Every one of us has an IBM 360 in our pocket today, where earlier it used to be in a huge computer center in one of these academic institutions. But it's got consumerized in a lot of ways, whether it was social media or mobile or analytics or on cloud, which has brought. But the biggest drivers for us is that there is a very high mobile penetration, 100% TV coverage, so people are more aware. Citizens know what to expect. And when they know what to expect, they demand higher, and a democracy would mean that there is people demanding better quality of life, and I think that translates itself in a democratic world, whether who runs the government. So this year, rather last year, the same people voted a strong mandate given to the Modi government. Just for those of you interested in numbers, we had 820 million eligible voters last year, 820 million. Out of them, 560 million, which was a good 60%, showed up to vote. And 100% of them voted electronically. And when we had to get the result of the 560 million, it was out in 4 hours. And I think all this at this large scale could not have been done if it wasn't for technology. So, we are already seeing the whole impact of technology coming in here. But today, you have a clear mandate from the people that they need to deliver, and we have 4 years' time, so we are very excited of what we can do in the next 3 to 4 years. Technology is available. I think that's the reason we are all here. It's becoming more affordable, very intuitive, so you don't really need computer scientists to operate and use it. And more important than anything else, we have no alternative, right? We have tried the physical means, and I think technology will be a biggest mover. Of course, many other things need to be done. So let's look at some of the changes that are taking place. This is fresh from the oven. We started a project called NOFN, which was National Optical Fiber Network. The we have 840 million people in rural areas. There's only 2% broadband connectivity today. And average, we have about 3,000 population in every village, which is less than 600 households. So how do you actually provide them connectivity? Now, no organization is going to do it commercially. So the government of India actually has said that we will connect every village where there is a government body called a panchayat, right, with fiber. And that's 250,000 villages, and that would mean 1.6 million kilometers of fiber to be laid. 1.6 million kilometers of fiber to be laid, and that's a huge number, as you would appreciate, across the country. We have, in those, connection will go to 800,000 primary schools, health centers, and households. And by the way, since the government is investing in this, connectivity is going to be available cheap. Now, this is the biggest enabler. And by the way, we have covered about 10% of the villages, but we have just revamped this whole project, and the next target is to complete it in the next 3 years. There are about 10% villages which are not even accessible to fiber. So in those cases, satellite, Google's Loon, or any of these technologies for which discussion is going on will happen. This is one of the largest projects of its kind in the world today to provide connectivity. And if this does, it becomes a major enabler for what's ahead. Aadhaar, I'm not sure if you heard this name. Aadhaar means fundamentals and base. This is world's largest biometric ID system. The issue is people do not have an identity, unlike, say, United States or even Singapore for that matter, where you have a social security number. Majority of the population do not have an identity. If they do not have an identity, how are you going to reach them? And the identity could not just be a card, so it had to be a digital card. This project is one of those projects which I think the technology world should be very proud of, which got started as an idea in 2009, and here we are 6 years later into it. 818 million Aadhaar numbers, that means citizens, today are on a digital identity, which would mean that they have their background, their photograph, iris scan, and 10 fingerprints somewhere. And this system, actually, when you put your thumb on any of the devices and you say, you claim this is who you are, it will say yes, you are or not. So it is instant authentication that you are actually the person that you said you were. Now, guess what happens with this? Because this becomes an enabler, you are now able to link up bank accounts, you are able to reach individual, you can give targeted subsidies because you know the person, and you are able to link the person up, and there is no leakages possible because you reach. Now, this was, a lot of people were naysayers, they said it'll never happen. A number of people raised issues on privacy, saying you're capturing biometrics, is it secure? But then, technology had answers to every one of them, and I think we are very fortunate that this program has come in, and I think, as I said, the first one was optical fiber network as a connectivity. The second one is the digital identity. In fact, almost all point-of-sale devices are now getting changed in India to have biometric access and biometric authentication, because this responds in less than a second or two, right, to an authentication with powerful engines at the back end. So this particular one is going to be used extensively across, and a lot of young people are developing applications because we haven't even seen what the advantage of this could be and how we could leverage this. So we had the connectivity, we had this Aadhaar. Where does it take us? So this, forget the first 3 words, that's the official name of the program called Jan Dhan Yojana. Literally translated means public wealth, or everyone is engaged. This is really a financial inclusion project where we encouraged every rural household to have at least one person who would have a bank account. Now, we had issues of how do we verify their background and particulars, but that was already done by Aadhaar. And you had to motivate people. So when this program got launched last year, they said, you don't have to keep a single rupee or a dollar in the balance in the bank account. So it's a zero balance, because the problem that village people had, that they were earning the money that they spent the same day, so where are they going to have money to open an account? They gave them a debit card. So we have our own payment system called RuPay, and they would get a debit card. They could get loans up to 5,000 rupees. They would get, whoever opens an account will get a life insurance for 30,000 and an accident insurance of 100,000. And there would be funds transfer, electronic transfer of subsidies, all that possible. So guess what happened? Technology was there, gave these incentives. They used every one of these technologies here, VSAT, the digital micro ATMs, the payment bridges, payment systems, and mobile banking. And the achievement is that just in this last 8 months, 150 million accounts have been opened. 150 million. And again, I really wanted to bring these examples to you to say that the development and the ICT and the D is no longer at a pilot level, it's actually scaling. We have 134 million cards issued. The money right now is less, so it is only $2.5 billion that have come in as deposits. And this has just started, so 28,000 overdrafts have happened. And just to show what technology can do, in a week's time, 18 million bank accounts were opened. 18 million in 1 week. And that became a Guinness World Record. But I think these are good anecdotes to talk about, because you can see technology is really helping scale up. We have many states which are 100% covered today, and I think it's good to see that more than 85% of financial inclusion has happened. And what would that mean? There would be small savings. The woman in the village would be able to keep the money, right, save for herself. People would not have to go to loan sharks, and their lives would completely change. Plus, small loans to, the banks did not have access to the farmer, and the farmer didn't have access to the bank. Now this is actually providing it. Healthcare, I have many examples here, but let me give you the one or two that are really, we didn't have, since we don't have primary healthcare, you actually take and make that mobile. You take the healthcare, make the healthcare mobile. So this call 108 system started. You would probably say, hey, what's new about it? Because almost every country has a 911 or some other. But this one was actually areas where people didn't have. Now people have mobile phones, so they can call, right, even if the other system wasn't there. So right now, through this process where you actually have ambulances which have paramedics and so on, technology has enabled that people can actually be used to reach their GIS, GPRS, of course, the call centers, fleet management systems are being used. And this has been going on for, I don't know, you were associated with this, what, about 10 years now? Yeah. So during this period, yeah, it's 10 years, so it started in 2005. We believe that 1.2 million people were saved or impacted. We attend 22,000 plus emergencies every day. There is 160 seconds to dispatch the ambulance, which is as good as it gets, and it's taken average of 18 minutes to reach the site. In a country like India, where I showed you the first few slides where traffic hardly moves, this is in the rural areas where access to healthcare wasn't available, and technology has made that happen. So healthcare, again, a lot more work to be done, but things have started happening. Then our issue became, how would people be digitally literate? It's all very nice. And mark my words, in India, digital literacy is going to precede literacy. We are struggling to get literacy in, but digital literacy, which is so intuitive, is happening. A program was started actually in the organization that I used to work for, called the National Digital Literacy Mission. We started this as a CSR activity in collaboration with Intel and Microsoft and Google. And our objective was to have one person in every household digitally literate. And the digitally literate didn't mean that the guy could do programming, but he knew how to access and what to get out of technology. So a large number of people did this, but I must give you some examples of what happened. In fact, we have this new scheme called Follow the Fiber. So wherever the fiber is landing in a village, we adopt that village and saying we will make this village digitally literate. And I met this lady from Northeast, which is up in the northeast side, very remote areas, and this lady, for her livelihood, they have a lot of bamboo there, so she makes bamboo pickles. And she says bamboo is a short period thing, and I only make enough for my village, which is where I share. And then she learned about what digital can do. And she says, I have a Facebook page, and she is now selling in about 30 villages around. Her sales has become 4 or 5 times what it used to be. So I think there is impact happening. It is not only about, and I would encourage that some of you who are in this space actually do actual research based on the impact that's happening. I met have you seen a tuk-tuk or a auto, 3-wheeler? We have a lot of them in our country. And I met a person who was a driver of a 3-wheeler, and he also went through this digital literacy program. And I said, so what did you learn? And of course, I couldn't understand his language, so we had a translator. He says, you know what? I've learned how to download music, and I have it now on my flash drive. Can you imagine this guy in the village is talking about a flash drive? And he says, I put it in my auto. I have the latest music, and hence people prefer to come in my vehicle than any other, and my sales has increased. So, it's impacting. And by the way, in those 3 villages where we did this impact analysis, there were 1,800 households in those 3 villages. 52% of the people who showed up to volunteer for digital literacy were women. And just imagine the impact that happens if women get in there, where they can talk about family health, they can access information now. So because of all this technology, digital marketplaces have started coming up, more than 500,000 job seekers. This is very recent. 60,000 employers have come together, so we are able to connect people. And then the question that would come up is, is this started happening in a larger scale? Yes, it is now building up because, we are finding lots of local apps people are developing because connectivity is there today. Now, well said, I've given you some examples, but the task is huge and big, and that's why I think we are all in this room today. There are many barriers. So the first barrier is really affordability. Huge, large project costs. I mentioned to you about those 1.6 million kilometers. And by the way, that cable is dug and put 1.6 meters under the ground because that is the level you need where the rodents will not come and chew the cables, right? So it's a very large project of digging all the way through. So it is expensive. The device and connectivity costs are high. Cost of applications and technology, while the cost keeps coming down, it is still expensive. So what are the solutions? I think enough studies have been given to the government, and they realize that the payback is very high just by reduced leakages. So if they use technology, get this connectivity, the money they spend, right? For example, the fiber project, I think the payback for an infrastructure project like this is about 5 years, which for an infrastructure project is very, very good. Improved farm productivity, better citizen health, and also we introduced a small cess. So every time we use a phone, half a cent or a quarter of a cent is put in a pool, and now we have a fairly large fund available to fund the. So people are finding solutions for them. I think instead of everyone owning a device, there is an internet kiosk. And let me just give you an example. I told you about the telephone that were not available in '95, but we still had landlines available. But since everybody couldn't get a landline, we had these kiosks where you go and you make your private phone calls, right? And this person used to earn. So similarly now, a new market is developing where instead of just the phone, now this guy has a printer, he has a PC, he's got a connectivity, and people go to him, send messages, send photographs across, and also he prints out things for them. So there is, costs are coming down. There is crowdsourcing of content that's going on in multilingual areas. So there's a lot of content available. Now we're putting it in one area. So there are some solutions that are there, but affordability continues to be a barrier. Capacity and capability. It's okay if you put the infrastructure. We have large number of agencies that are involved. Government does not necessarily have technology people within, and citizens are not digitally literate, and I mentioned that that program is going on. So the decision is, and we have almost 3.5 million people that work in the IT sector, which we work for the rest of the world, but we don't do as much work within the country. So there is extensive use of private sector that's planned. And of course, the National Academy and others are being looked at. The third barrier is resistance to change, because there are vested interests, and then it is this whole thing about unknown. Would I lose my job? What will happen? People don't want to access. And this, I guess, is one big social change that we need to bring in. But a lot of people have seen the advantage with the advent of mobile or what it can happen. But what is happening today is the government of India is mandating that all government service will be delivered electronically in 5 years' time. That means there is no choice. They have mandated that if you were receiving subsidy, you will only receive it through a bank account. And for that, you need to have a bank account which works on your mobile and is linked to Aadhaar, right, the digital authentication process. So there is a forced adoption that's being happening. And of course, the younger generation is coming in, and I think they're the change agents, if you may call them. Execution and project management. Projects of this large scale, I was involved in this committee which was reviewing why the fiber is taking time. Projects are huge and very large, and they can get stuck any time. And they have to be done simultaneously. Most of the projects cannot work sequentially. And there are so many agencies that are involved in this. So this is one big area, while I mentioned that some solutions that are there is really working from top down. So the Prime Minister is now reviewing the progress himself every month. And I think that's really driving things. But still, I think we have gaps in terms of execution. And of course, there are concerns that, now that everything is digital and, data moves around easily, healthcare records are there, right? There's a lack of trust in the whole system, and particularly with whatever happened recently with the WikiLeaks and everything else. People do not trust governments, right? And a lot of people think that profiling may happen. And I think it's important that, we quickly enact our Privacy Act and create more and more awareness on cybersecurity. So there are these barriers, but I think a lot of work is happening. So I would just summarize here by saying there is a large section of a society which lack basic amenities. So while we discuss here in these rooms, it is really very heartening that you have taken the last word D, as the Dean mentioned, that you recently added the word D, because I think that's where the most impact will be. Business has gained, but I think it's now time that society started gaining far more through development, through technology. Traditional methods have been used and failed, right? We've tried many, many things to get and reach out and meet those amenities there. Technology is a big enabler. It is proven, scalable, and is becoming affordable. So I think that would be a very important way for us to use. And for us, government would need a missionary zeal to embrace and implement these. I think we are at a cusp, as I mentioned, I speak here as somebody from India, which has large number of needs. We are giving ourselves the next 4 years, and I hope you will get a lot more feed onto your research on what has happened. And we believe that with all these hurdles, et cetera, collectively, with your help and so on, we can make it happen. Many thanks. I'm not sure we have time, or happy to take any questions.
Now that we've managed to get my technology going. Thank you very much, Mr. Mittal. It was very interesting to see, especially for the ICTD community, to see these projects moving up to scale. And in India, when we're talking scale, we're looking at not just millions, we're looking at hundreds of millions. So these are very exciting numbers. We'll have about 15 minutes of question and answers. And so for those of your questions, we'll send some roaming mics into the audience, or you can use the mics which have been put over there. So I'll just request you to walk over to the mics if you have a question, and I'll send a roving mic down as well.
Thank you for the talk. I found it very interesting and impressive. I had a question mainly about the banking, the financial inclusion that you discussed. And my question was, who is actually managing these bank accounts? Is this a private sector or is this the public sector?
Sorry, is that
for managing the bank accounts, when you've signed up these hundreds of millions of people who, for their first time, are having bank accounts, who is managing those? Are these managed privately, or is this a public sector initiative?
So these are, so we have a combination of cooperative banks, public sector banks, and private banks, right? So large numbers that I showed there actually happen in the public sector banks, right? Their reach is larger, and they also have a social objective to do that. As we said, the numbers in terms of the money transactions is still very low because this is just the first year, but these people have a bank account now, right? And one of the bigger enablers were, everybody is so scared about how to open bank accounts because a large number of bank accounts could be fraudulent accounts. So we, if you had to, what we saw at KYC, which is know your client or know your customer, which is authentication of your background, but because they had an Aadhaar card, which had already identified the person, right, that became the base. So now if I had to open an account, it was very quick because I just needed to have an Aadhaar card, and that gave my background, home address, everything else. It was pre-verified, and I didn't need to really worry about. So we have just about started giving out the direct payments. Just to give you an example, the cooking gas, the LPG, right, is subsidized to almost 35 to 40% of its cost. So today, a person like me or you who also use cooking gas in our homes, we get the same subsidy because you sell it at the same price. But right now, they've just come out with this program where now I'm paying the market price for the LPG, whereas this person will also pay the market price, but the difference between the market price and what the government thinks is the subsidy will be transferred to him as cash. So there are, the subsidies do not have the kind of leakages that I should bear my cost of the gas, whereas this person needs to. So there are many such areas that are now going to go through this. We do have issues. So recently, when the government mandated that everyone should have an Aadhaar card, which is the authentication card, some social activists went out to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came up with a judgment that you cannot mandate that everybody should have a card, because that means you're being unfairly denying. So we always keep running into these social issues, which we'll have to deal with. But overall, I think that the larger good, right, we'll have to do this. Now, we ran into very interesting issues and problems. It's okay to talk about fingerprint, right, for all of us who are well-abled bodies, right? We had people from the farmers who had lost their thumb, right? If you look at the construction workers who do manual work, they actually, I'm not sure you know, they have no fingerprints. They have no fingerprints, right? The skin is so hard, there is no fingerprint, right? So you had to all the time work alternative ways of how. So we still are grappling with those on-the-ground issues, but in spite of that, we had 800 million people who did this.
This goes to the financial issues. One of the things that happens quite often in a cash economy is that there's corruption of various types. When you put all of the economy into a very accountable system, you take that away. And that means that there are power issues that benefit some but hurt others. How does that get worked out in this transition to a digital banking system?
So you're absolutely right. Most economies and the governments would like to move to a cashless way because, the more. So we do have a parallel economy that runs today. And by the way, that parallel economy is running far more in the upper echelons of the society, right, where you have land transactions going on with cash, etc. But when you look at this particular society, they are actually quite happy with the cashless transaction happening. The problem that you referred is the huge number of middlemen that we have, right? All of them were making money because they were intermediaries, and intermediaries are getting lost. And these are the ones who are actually putting in as many spokes as they can, right? So they are still continuing to fight things back. They're finding all these flaws that I talked about. We have a big debate going on whether that Aadhaar number that we're talking about is citizenship or residence, right? So, we have porous borders and we do have a lot of migration that happens, and so they're raising all those issues so that the system fails, right? But the way it is getting addressed is by enactment, so it becomes a law, so you have no choice. So when you have a law which says there is no other way that we will give subsidies, there is no other way that government services will be given. Also, there is a major problem on execution because we don't have, as I mentioned, enough capacity. So, we have the central government and we have state governments. And as per our constitution, the roles and responsibilities are divided. So we are struggling now in a lot of ways where the same application that actually works in 30 states, each guy is buying his own, right? Because that's what is mandated by law. So now we're coming out with more solutions saying, why don't you design once and make it available free so that every state will actually use the same? Because if we have different APIs, then we're not able to aggregate the information and data to use it. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Hi, this is Kelvin from ICANN. Thank you for the fantastic presentation on the situation in India. I think you alluded to this earlier in the presentation by saying that India has a lot of, I think, local languages, but I don't hear this in the rest of your presentation. So my question is, to what extent do you think is language an impediment to the adoption of technology? Do you think we should be creating more localized content for villages and for a certain country? I think in India it may not be so much of a challenge because you're pretty proficient in English, but there could be places like some places in Southeast Asia or in Latin America that where English is not really the main language of use, and so my question is how do you think language plays a part?
So your real question is around languages, right? Sorry? Multiple languages.
Well, I guess it's how, to what extent do you think the lack of knowledge of English is going to be an impediment to the adoption of
lack of language, English language? No, I think it's a big issue, and somewhere I think we should question ourselves, and we do have many people represented here from the industry. So I think we need, in many cases, particularly in countries like India, native languages where searches could happen. Today, you have a GUI which is in multiple languages, but the backend is still run on English or machine language. But I think that's not terribly intuitive for doing. So there is work going on, and but it's very slow today on having operating systems and search engines and so on, which are in the native language. So we do suffer from that background. But the interesting part when it comes to the user interface is today technology and connectivity is allowing very intuitive. So when we did those digital literacy program, we actually did them in 3 different states where the languages are very different, and it was all through intuitive icons and so on. And our experiences, and we've done it over the last 10, 15 years, where we find that we had a program, and I think we did this program also in some country, in some places in Africa, which was called Hole in the Wall. So actually we put a screen, right, computer screen, inside a hole in the wall, and we left it where there were school children, and there were keyboards and this, but also touch screens. And we found that within 2 or 3 days, these kids had mastered it without ever having known how to operate it. So I think this was a very good experiment done, and I think we took this experiment to several African countries, which had the same response, where you people intuitively would learn how to do this, and today's younger generation does it. So while we still struggle with the language issue and also cultural issues, because what's culturally acceptable at one place has different connotations at another. But I think as we go forward with these GUIs, we'll be able to do it even if we don't answer all the questions about having native language search engines. And I think that's something that we need to think and work through. And sometimes it's not in commercial interests of existing people who have this. So while Google and others do have searches happening in the languages, but they're not native. There's a translation that happens.
Yeah, that's fine. So thank you very much for that presentation. The numbers are truly impressive. And if I understood you correctly, one of the reasons that you gave for why the scaling up was so successful was this idea of not giving people the choice, but basically having, as you said, enforced adoption. And for many of us, actually having a choice in technology is part of what makes new technology so interesting. And so I was wondering whether there's any way to square the idea of scaling up with the idea of still giving users choices. It's a philosophical question in a way, but I think it's very relevant for this community.
So say that again, the last sentence you said.
So how do we square scaling up with actually giving individuals still a choice to opt in or opt out of particular technologies?
Yeah, so you're very right. So we are India's democracy anyway, right? So people have choices of change and so on. But if you look at them, there is no choice right now for them. So they are opting. So when we did this Aadhaar, by that time it wasn't mandated, but people realized that it is good for them to have this. So while you could give a choice to people, they actually would take it. Now the lack of choice is actually being given to the government rather than to the individual. So you're saying, let's take a case of a simple thing like a birth certificate, right? You have to go to a place, they actually give you a birth certificate, and the guy, just to give it across the counter to you, might even take some money, and that's retail. But now you don't have to do this. So they are forcing that all these things would be done electronically and would not be, and there'll be an audit trail. So I think the forced mandate is far more for the government to do it than for the individual. But on the other hand, like I said, subsidies. There are still, it's going to be a phased program because now you're looking at 100% coverage in a place, and only those places can you actually get down to doing it. But I would think, and it's a good debate to have, but I would believe that, and these words are not very politically correct, in the larger good, right, it is better to mandate and make things happen than leave it for people with choices where people might get manipulated.
I think it's a good debate to have.
Good morning, Mr. Mittal. This is Komati Ale from
hi,
the
hi.
University of Southern California. I'm really interested in education, but my question today is on disaster management. So, I mean, it's a timely issue, it's timely consideration as well, but I'm just interested in knowing, be it in India or regionally, how do you think the role of technologies could be better addressed or taken into consideration beyond pilot programs, actually, in the maintenance, recovery of disasters? Because now we have a large-scale disaster in Nepal that just happened. So, I mean, ICTs could be addressed or in, be it disaster management, mitigation, or preparation, but particularly in recovery, how do you see the role of ICTs taking place there?
So I haven't studied the subject enough, but when the first tsunami hit this region in Indonesia, and to be honest, I knew the word tsunami, but I didn't know what it meant, except that we use tsunami for any other disaster that happened, right? We got hit, and it was quite odd that this tsunami's epicenter was in Indonesia, in this part of the world, and there were several hours of pre-warning before it touched Indian shores, right? And nobody had information, right? And if those few that they had, they'd never thought of the severity, and they actually had a chance to save themselves, but they did not, right? And I think that is a big awakening call that came in, that look, in this today's world when forecasts, not of every, you can't forecast earthquakes, and so on. So there would be, three areas of disaster management. One is the preemptive one. The second is while the disaster is happening, and the third one is post-disaster, right? And all these places, I would think that the technology would play a big role. And I think the most recent example we would think is of Nepal, right? When the earthquake hit, and it wasn't, earthquakes, everybody knew that this place has got its faults and so on, but then, people were not as prepared. But when it happened, I think the post of that was pretty well managed this time using technology. There was mapping going on, there were surveillance, GPS, the whole remote sensing work was there. But I really don't know all, but I would think that a lot can be done. Disasters are not limited to countries, right? A single country. They are far more global. And I would, as I see it, I think there's a lot more sharing happening now than they ever did before, right? On both forecasts and so on. Right now, I think it's quite primitive. The only example that I would think, a good example of how it got managed was in Andhra Pradesh. We had typhoons which were almost 200 kilometers an hour, and you don't normally get that. These were forecasted, and hence they could do some evacuation. But interestingly, the chief minister himself parked himself in the disaster area, right, and was supervising. So I think human intervention was still required while he probably was getting mapping of what was going on. So I gave you a long answer that shows my ignorance on the topic.
Hi. Is this on? Is this on? That's better. Andy Dearden from Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. My background is in humans and computers, and I'm very interested in this boundary between technology and what happens in society. And you've painted a very positive picture. I mean, the numbers are just incredible, and trying to do anything in India at an Indian scale is a phenomenal thing to think about. But I'm a bit concerned in the way that what we've discovered in human-computer interaction and computer-supported cooperative work is when you introduce formal technologies, there's always kind of workarounds, and it's a bit like squeezing a balloon. So in thinking about how you can bring this kind of transparency and accountability into all sorts of aspects of Indian society or any society, I'm sort of slightly worried that you're squeezing a balloon and people will be relying on the information they get from the computer system as a vision of what is happening in the wider society. And of course, what they'll get from the computer system is the shape of the hands that are squeezing the balloon. And I'm wondering, within that framework, how do you get at the picture of the bits of the balloon that are sort of outside of the technology? What's happening around that? I was visiting IIIT Bangalore recently, and they've been doing some work there looking at introducing technology in the land registration and taxation system. And what sort of seems to happen is that they've squeezed the balloon at one point, and the place where the financial transactions that you really don't want to see happening has just sort of popped out somewhere else. And it's, how do you get around that? What do you need to build into the human systems so that you actually know not just what is happening inside the technological frame, but it's actually what's happening in the society and around that technology?
So there is an inherent assumption, if I may, in what you said, is that there is somebody wanting to provide misinformation as well, right? And that could happen easily because And we have many examples of that happening. Now with Twitter and Facebook and everything, information travels much faster than anything else, and WhatsApp. And we had a situation where in a city like Bangalore, right, which has a lot of our people from, India is multicultural and so on, but we have a lot of people from Northeast there. And there was a little skirmish that happened between two individuals one night, but the next morning somebody just sent out a message saying, oh, these guys are going to be bashed up and whatever else. And we had, almost 15,000 people trying to leave the city, trying to take a train, and this was all about misinformation. So, you had to work and use the same technology back to question that. Now, you're quite right that there could be, every time technology comes in or any new change comes in, there is unintended negative consequence, right? I cannot think of anything. You take a car, you drive it, you might hit somebody, right? So there is a chance of your doing it, and so I cannot think of anything which does not have an unintended consequences. But if we look at, in a country like India, Maslow's hierarchy, right? And you say, what does the person need? And you will say, he had no information. He's getting some information right now. Now, there are checks and balances in the system, because in a country like India, which is democracy, you do one wrong step and it's on the papers and the channels are all over you. So you don't escape any specific. So we had issues on religious conversions, which, very sensitive issues in the country. And I think those would but technology would come in and play. But I would think that there has been much more acceptance of technology. Technology for you and me in this room is in our face, because we deal with the back end of it. But for most people, they don't even realize that this is technology, right, as what's happening on their mobile phone, etc. Just to give you an example, we have one of the largest railway system in the world, right? And reservation system was awful. We had to book tickets, and most of the time you had to pay a little bit of money to get a seat. Now everything is automated. You get your seat numbers on your mobile. There is a complete audit trail of it, and we have suddenly found that class of people who used to be haggling for money, they're gone. And it's happened, right? It's happened in our lifetime. So I think we have many examples of we do worry will government, because you give them tools, and what happened in the United States, would they profile? So if my bank account, my car, my credit card, everything is tied up to Aadhaar, then I'll do one search on Aadhaar, and you have profiled me, or where I went, what I did, right? And will this big brother who's watching me, right? So there is that concern that's surely there, and we are looking at how privacy acts can stop that. And we do hope that the media will play a big role in providing that balance. No answers to what you said, because there will be somebody who will misuse it, right? So tell me in this room, I haven't understood the motivations of a hacker, right? And the one who's not stealing money, but who's actually changing. So there is always this. Are we done?
You talked about whistleblowing, and you said it causes mistrust, and mistrust in itself is a threat towards security. And you got me thinking, do we have any choice to do whistleblowing without, causing this distrust? Whistleblowing in a sustainable way?
No, good question. I don't think, those remedial actions have been thought of. Currently, the only way it's happening is to continuously create awareness and do some enactment, right, which is giving them a legal arm to be able to act when there would be a breach of trust, right? So today, for example, in the banking, there are some very severe laws, right, which prevent you if there was fraud committed, or there are insurances that are available. So as we go forward, I think more and more of these tools will come up. But I think you have a good suggestion there in terms of how that trust could be built in a more, when I was making up these slides, I was also reading up and putting things up. But that's that guy in the village who actually did not have access to a whole lot of information, even think of mistrust. It doesn't even occur to him. It is the intelligentsia who's thinking and saying, how would somebody misuse this information, or what risks I run? Sometimes I wonder, when this whole world is talking about privacy, look at the young people. They put on Facebook voluntarily data that you squirm at why did they put it up. And on one hand, we are debating privacy. On the other hand, there is nobody counseling the young people of what not to put and share information that shouldn't be in public domain. So I think this is this whole debate of what is private and what's not. And I think we do worry. And with Internet of Things, will somebody be shutting down my AC just as a prank, right? Or messing up my refrigerator? So, I think there are many things ahead which could worry us, but at the end, I think we all represent technology. We should look at the good it can do and see how technology itself can overcome the negative that's there. But thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to all of you and share thoughts, and invite you, as since this is a research-focused group, I would say come now, but surely come after 3 years, where I guess there will be more slides showing more millions of examples of technology having done things. Thanks very much.
Thank you.